We need to talk, Isolda.
Not here, not now.
It has to be now.
All I had was a wedding dress and an abusive man waiting to call that prison a marriage. Caetano had already bought my father's debt, the house where he intended to lock me away, and the padlock for the studio he swore to destroy. 2 hours before the altar, I sent a message to the only man dangerous enough to face him. If you still want me, come get me. And when I walked out dressed as a bride with the wrong man, I understood too late. That escape had a price too. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Bet on the Table. The first light came through the skylight of the Greenpoint studio, the way it enters an old church, slanted and dusty, falling exactly on the right corner of the canvas I had promised to deliver by the end of the week. I had been on my feet since 4 in the morning, with a brush clenched between my teeth as I mixed an ochre tone that had been escaping me for 3 days. The woman in the portrait watched me from the easel with a smile the client had asked for, friendlier, more grandmotherly. I did what I could. Grandmothers, in my experience, rarely smiled on command. They smiled when they saw us walk through the kitchen door. On top of the workbench, a yellow post-it curled with age read Florence in handwriting that had been mine 6 years ago. I had stuck it there on the first day I rented that space, and I had a habit of touching it with my fingertip every time I walked by, like someone checking whether the dream was still pinned in place. I got up, stretched my spine, and crossed the studio barefoot to the locked cabinet in the back. I turned the small key that lived on my choker. Inside, folded with the care you give to things that don't come back, was my mother's silk jacket, the color of old wine, with an olive branch embroidery on the lining. She had died 2 years ago of a cancer that came in silently, ate everything from the inside, and left without apologizing. I pressed my forehead against the silk for a second, closed the cabinet, turned the key again. That was how I started every day I needed to work more than I needed to feel. "Good morning, Mom," I said to the closed cabinet door. "Today you give me strength, because I've got dinner with the reptile." The joke had no one to laugh at it, and that was the problem. I laughed alone, quietly, because the silence of the studio sometimes gave me the feeling that if I didn't laugh, it would swallow me. I went back to the canvas. I worked until the ochre turned into grandmother. When the light shifted color in the skylight, I knew it was nearly 6 in the evening, and that the black dress my mother would have hated was waiting for me on the hanger. The restaurant in Manhattan was the kind that charged you for the air between the courses. Heavy curtains, a waiter who walked as if he were in mourning, silverware that weighed more than my bank account. Ottavio Marchetti, my father, met us at the entrance with the posture of a man who had rehearsed 3 times in front of the mirror. "My girl," he said, and gave me 2 kisses on the cheek that were, more than affection, a plea for peace. I didn't give him peace. I squeezed his arm with the exact force of someone who understands she'll need the gesture later, and followed the maitre d' down the hallway to the back table. My fake mother, the stepmother my father had been introducing as "your mother" since I was 18, was already seated next to him, wearing the pearl necklace she put on whenever she needed to look respectable. And there was Caetano Bramante, 38 years old, graphite tie, heavy amber perfume and expensive leather that hit your mouth before reaching your nose. He stood up slowly, like someone doing the rest of the world a favor by existing, and reached out a hand to my waist, before my waist even knew he existed. "Isolda," he said, and the way he pronounced my name made it clear he thought he owned it. "You look stunning, amore." I'm not amore to any man who says amore. I smiled with the teeth my mother taught me to use when a child can't argue with an adult. "Caetano," I answered, punctual, as always. He pushed my chair in for me, and I sat down feeling his hand slide off my waist a centimeter further than was polite. It was the first mark he left on me that night, not the last. Ottavio ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, because he was the kind of man who ordered the most expensive wine when he didn't have any money at all. We toasted. I swallowed the whole sip at once. Caetano laughed as if I were a precocious little girl at an adult party. "Before the main course," my father said, clasping his hands like a Sunday priest, "I have news that brings honor to this family." I already knew. I had known since the week before, when he had come to the studio with red eyes and told me everything would work out. Everything working out in my father's mouth was shorthand for throwing me under the truck. "Isolda and Caetano are going to be married in 6 weeks, Ottavio said, and raised his glass like a man raising a flag on conquered land. The table around us, 3 couples I barely knew, my father with his usual yellowed mustache, a groomsman beside him, gave polite applause. Kitano held my hand over the tablecloth. He squeezed. He smiled. "I am a lucky man," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Isolde has that charming little hobby of painting, you know? She'll have her own studio at the new house. She'll have everything she needs to keep herself entertained between the obligations of being Mrs. Bramante. Hobby. Entertained. Mrs. Bramante." I felt my face heat up, but I didn't lower my eyes. My mother never lowered her eyes for any man, and she died of cancer, not of shame. I wasn't going to dishonor her memory in front of the groomsman's yellowed mustache. "Kitano," I said, in the sweetest voice I had. "Painting has been paying my own bills for 4 years. It's not exactly a hobby. It's a craft." He laughed. The whole table laughed, because men at that kind of table laughed when he laughed. But his hand, under the tablecloth, slid from the back of my hand to my wrist, and squeezed. He squeezed with the calm of someone who knows no one will see. He squeezed at the exact spot where the bone meets the vein. He squeezed until I felt my pulse skip under his thumb. "Of course, amore," he said, smiling at the room. "You're so talented." I didn't look away. I held the smile. I lifted my other hand to my glass and took another sip, slowly, without trembling. Inside, something in me that had been dozing for years opened its eyes. "You just squeezed me under a table in public, reptile in a tie. I'm going to destroy you. I don't know how yet, but I will." It was the clearest thought I'd had in 24 years. Caetano let go of my wrist when the waiter brought the appetizer. I picked up the fork with my right hand, the one that had been squeezed, and cut into the veal without looking. It hurt. I smiled. For the rest of the dinner, I memorized the way he chewed with his mouth half open, the way he called the waiter without saying please, the way he talked about the textile business, as if it were poetry. I memorized every detail the way a painter memorizes light. Who he was, all of him, I was going to need to know in order to get out of this alive. Ottavio, from across the table, watched me with the kind of pride that cowardly men invent for themselves when they've sold what they shouldn't have sold. I held the smile for him too. I learned that night that smiling is a way of postponing the knife. At the end of dinner, Caetano kissed me near the mouth. Not exactly on the mouth, because I turned my face with the exact timing of someone who had been rehearsing it since the aperitif. He laughed again. "You're a fierce one, amore. I like that. For now. For now." I kept those 2 words for the rest of my life. Ottavio insisted we go back to his house in Manhattan to talk about the preparations. It was a trap, but I wanted the trap. I needed his kitchen with the doors closed and the wine still on my tongue to say what I had to say. My parents' kitchen was white, cold, too ornate for a family that was in debt. My mother, the fake one, turned on the tap to pretend she was washing something and not listening to us yell. Ottavio poured himself more wine. "Isolde, I know you're upset," he began. "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm furious. There's a difference. You sold me. I didn't sell you." "Dad." I planted both hands on the marble island. "How long have you owed that man?" Ottavio swallowed wine the way a man swallows confession. 4 years. "And how much?" He didn't answer. He looked at the tap my stepmother was pretending to operate. "How much, Dad?" "Enough for the house to go to auction, Isolde. Enough for your mother's name to end up in a public lawsuit. Enough for us to lose even the cemetery where she's buried, because the plot is in my name, and my name isn't worth the paper it's written on." I closed my eyes for just 1 second. When I opened them, my father was crying standing up, with his glass tilted, spilling wine on the sleeve of his jacket. "And you use my name as collateral," I said, slowly. "Caetano only forgives the debt if you're his wife. Not money, not work, not anything else. You. That's what he asked for. Why does he want me, Dad? He doesn't even like me. He likes what you don't hand over." My father wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Men like him want what resists." I stayed very quiet for a while. My stepmother, behind me, finally shut the tap. "Do you remember," I said, "when Mom was in the hospital, and you told me that we'd find a way, that we always found a way?" "I remember. We never found any way, Dad. It was someone. Someone paid those bills. I never asked you who because I was afraid of the answer. Today I'm afraid too. But I'll tell you one thing. I came close enough to him that he could feel my wine-soaked breath mixed with his. You just did to your daughter what you did to your wife. You stalled, and I'm going to pay the bill alone my way." I left without closing the door. I walked down the hallway with my shoe in my hand. I caught a rideshare on the corner, crossed the bridge with my forehead pressed against the cold window, and got out at my building in Greenpoint with the feeling that the Brooklyn air was a little more breathable than Manhattan's, even if it smelled like wet garbage. I climbed the 3 flights of the studio building and went in. I turned on only the desk lamp. The portrait of the grandmother commission was still there, smiling the smile I had made up for her. I went to the locked cabinet. I took the key off my choker. I opened it. My mother's silk jacket was where it had always been, folded in 3, with the smell of me and the smell of her still sharing the same fabric. I pressed my forehead against it. I closed my eyes. "Mom," I whispered. "I don't know how yet, but I swear no one sells me again. I swear it on you." Out there, somewhere in Manhattan I couldn't see from my window, a clock started ticking. 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks. I closed the cabinet. I turned the key. I switched off the lamp, and in the darkness of the studio, before dropping onto the hard mattress in the corner where I slept on the nights I didn't go back to my old room at my father's house in Manhattan, I smiled for the first time all day, not out of joy, out of something else, something I had never felt before, and that, if it had a name, might be called decision. Chapter 2. The Stranger at the Cafe. 2 weeks later, I was standing at the door of the 3rd Chelsea Gallery that afternoon, with 3 canvases wrapped in brown paper under my arm, and the rain starting to come down like biblical punishment on top of my head. The first gallery had said, "Very interesting, but it's not our moment." The second had said, "Leave a portfolio at the front desk," and the receptionist had set the portfolio on top of a pile I was sure was going to recycling. The third was worse, because worse always comes after. "Marchetti," the gallerist repeated my last name into the internal phone, as if it were a foreign word. She was a woman of about 50, with glasses on top of her head, and a silk blouse that cost the rent of my studio. "Yes, I saw the canvases. You've got talent, sweetie." "Sweetie," I smiled without teeth. "But the market is tough right now," she went on. Maybe the right fiancé opens doors that we, on our own, take 10 years to open. Have you thought about that?" I thought about 3 things in very quick succession: throwing the canvas at her head, throwing up breakfast on the gallery's entrance, and leaving without answering. I picked the third, because it was the cheapest. "Thanks for your time," I said, with the sweetness I had begun to use like a knife. I crossed the glass door, and the rain came down on top of me, as if it were in a hurry to drown me. The 3 wrapped canvases turned into sponges within half a block. My mascara, which I had put on that morning out of the foolish hope of looking professional, ran down my face in 2 black lines, and I didn't bother to wipe it. I walked to the subway station and went down the steps dripping. The car was a cubicle of wet people, and every one of those people had somewhere to go and someone to be welcomed by. I got off in Brooklyn without knowing where I was going. I ended up on some random street, the kind that keeps switching neighborhoods depending on the decade, and shoved my shoulder against the first door that had coffee steam behind the glass. The bell rang above my head. I must have been the most pathetic entrance that cafe had seen that week. "Back table, please," I said to the woman behind the counter, and she looked at me with the pity of those who serve coffee to people who are about to cry. "And a croissant, and a cappuccino, and paper towels, if you're a very good person." She was a very good person. The back table was right by the window with grayish light outside and a growing puddle on the doorsill every time someone came in. I propped the 3 drenched canvases on the chair beside me, sat down, rested my forehead in my hands, and cried the kind of crying that makes no noise, because noise is expensive, and I had no more energy to spend. I stayed like that for about 10 minutes. The cappuccino came. The croissant came. I didn't touch either of them. Out there, the rain shifted direction 3 times. That was when the bell rang again, and I, without lifting my head, registered out of the corner of my eye that someone in a suit had come in. Dark suit, good shoes, the air of someone not from around there. I recognized those in any city. They're the men who walk into a cafe like men walking into a place that's going to be theirs while they're inside. He spoke in a low voice to the woman at the counter. He looked around. I saw when his gaze landed on my table, and I lifted my head by reflex, because a woman raised by an Italian mother knows when she's being sized up. He was tall, 30-something, eyes the color of expensive whiskey. He had a small scar at the corner of his mouth, on the right side, that looked as if it had been made by something that wasn't an accident. The suit was graphite gray, the color of the ties I had begun to hate, but on him the color seemed different. It wasn't ostentation, it was habit. He crossed the cafe with the stride of a man measuring the floor. "May I?" he asked, pointing at the chair across from mine. "It's full." The cafe had 4 free tables. I looked at the 4, looked at him, and arrived at the conclusion that he was either blind or lying, and neither of the two options was for my afternoon at that moment. But I was too tired to send away the only person who had walked into that cafe thinking it was worth sitting with me. "Sure," I said, and pushed the wet napkin aside to make space. He sat down. He ordered an espresso with only a nod to the woman at the counter, as if he had ordered there before. He took off his drenched coat, folded it on top of the chair beside him, and looked at me without hurry. "Bad day?" he asked. I laughed. The laugh came out half snorting, half hysterical, and definitely too loud for a small cafe. Bad is a word for optimists. I propped my chin on my hand. "I'm having what's known, in technical terms, as a dog of a month." He laughed quietly, the laugh of someone who doesn't laugh often, and laughs when it's worth it. I noticed. I'm a painter. I notice things other people don't notice, especially when I'm too sad to pretend I'm not looking. "Do you want to talk about it?" he said. "I don't know you. Exactly. The best venting is with someone you'll never see again." I laughed again. He was right. And I had 2 weeks of accumulated silence, 3 drenched canvases that weren't worth anything anymore, mascara running down, an untouched croissant, and a 6-week clock ticking in my head. "All right, stranger," I said, and pushed the croissant to the middle of the table. "You eat half. I'll talk. Fair?" He looked at the croissant. He looked at me. He picked up the right half with 2 fingers and bit one end without looking away from my face. "Fair," he said. I vented without a filter. I said my father was a coward with a mustache who had sold me to pay off a debt he had run up alone, at tables I had never sat at. I said my fiancé, official and blessed by heaven, was a reptile in a tie who squeezed your wrist under the table at the engagement dinner. I said I had spent the afternoon trying to sell 3 canvases at 3 galleries to scrape together escape money, and that the last gallerist had offered me the professional advice of finding the right fiancé. I said my mother had died 2 years ago, and I still kept her silk jacket in a locked cabinet, and that it was the only thing that still made sense in my life. I said what I really wanted was to get on a plane to Florence and spend 3 years studying the frescoes of the Cappella Brancacci until I forgot the cedar smell of the reptile's cologne. He listened without interrupting. At some point, in the middle of the venting, I looked at the half croissant in his hand and realized he had stopped eating. He was just looking at me. "And madam," he said, finally, in a slow tone, "still hasn't told me her name." "Isolda." "Marchetti." I let out my breath. "And you, stranger in an expensive suit, still haven't said yours." He hesitated for a second. I saw it. It was just a second, but I'm a painter. "Federico," he said. "Federico Valinari." The cafe went on existing around us. The woman at the counter went on drying the glass. The rain went on falling. But inside my head, something clicked the way it clicks when you recognize a name from a newspaper headline. Valinari. I had read that name in big letters over a story about the New York ports 3 months earlier. I had read it again in a city column about a tip that had been shelved. I had read it a 3rd time in a photo caption where a man in a jacket was leaving a courthouse without being photographed from the front. Cosa Nostra, Sicilian family, ports, construction, gambling. My face must have changed, because his changed too. It got more closed, more calm. The way I would learn later was his way when he was preparing for something. "Ah," I said, and it was the most idiotic sound I had ever produced with my mouth in 24 years. "Yes." He leaned his shoulder back against the chair. "That Valinari." I stood up. I sat. I stood up again. I sat again. I picked up the cappuccino, brought it to my mouth, remembered it was cold, set it down on the saucer, picked up the napkin, started twisting it between my fingers. I said, "just called my father a coward with a mustache, and my fiancé a reptile in a tie in front of the boss of the Sicilian Mafia in New York." "You did. Loud and clear. Loud and clear. And I offered you half my croissant." I accepted. He tilted his head slightly. It was good. I rested my forehead on the table for a second. When I lifted it, he was looking at me with something in the corner of his mouth that looked dangerously like a smile. "I need to go, Miss Marchetti." His voice dropped a note, and his lower register was even slower. "Before you go, I'd like to propose something to you." "No, you haven't even listened." "I don't need to listen." "Listen anyway." I don't know why I sat down. Maybe because the rain was still ugly. Maybe because the canvases on the floor weighed twice as much after being soaked. Maybe because the way he said listen wasn't an order. It was an offer, and I had never received an offer from a man that didn't come with an invoice. I sat. "I need to get married," he said. In 6 months. Congratulations. I crossed my arms. There are apps for that. My father is ill. For his title to officially pass to me, I need a wife within 6 months counting from January. It's a family rule. Not negotiable. I still think an app could fix that. I need a wife who looks good at public events, who has her own life, who doesn't need me to feel that she exists, and who can have, in exchange, her own studio, travel, money, freedom outside the official commitments. He said all of it at the same calm cadence. I think you fit every criterion. I went very quiet. The rain, outside, took over the silence between us. You're proposing marriage to me, I said slowly, in a Brooklyn cafe, 10 minutes after learning my name. I am. Over half a croissant. I am. As if I were, I don't know. A lot at an auction. The word auction came out of my mouth with a weight he hadn't expected. I saw his jaw harden by a millimeter. That's not how I see it, he said. But that's how you're offering it. I put my hand on the table, and it was trembling a little, but I pretended it wasn't. I picked up the napkin soaked in rain and sweat and spilled cappuccino, balled it up in my hand, and threw it in his face. He didn't flinch. The napkin hit the corner of his mouth, touched the small scar on the right side, and dropped onto the lapel of his jacket with a quiet sound of wet cloth. Have a great afternoon, Signore Valenieri, I said. I picked up the canvases, picked up the drenched coat, picked up the purse, and walked out of the cafe with the firmest step I could manage under the circumstances. The woman at the counter watched me as if she were watching a good movie. The bell rang above my head when I crossed the door. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. I crossed the street to the subway entrance. I went down the steps. I swiped the card. I sat on the bench of the empty car and stared at my knees for 6 whole stops. It was only when the 7th stop was announced that I reached into the pocket of my coat looking for a tissue, and my fingers found a small rectangle of thick cardstock that I hadn't put there, that I hadn't seen arrive there, but that had arrived there. I drew it out slowly. It was a matte black card, with a single inscription in silver, FV, and below it, written by hand, in the firm hand of someone who had signed few things in his life with so much certainty, a phone number. I looked at the card for the length of 2 stops. I thought about tearing it up. I swear on my mother's jacket that I thought about tearing it up. I lifted the card to eye level. My fingers approached the top corner. The mental tear line was ready, and I didn't tear it. I shoved the card back into the pocket of the drenched coat, and I held the outside of the fabric with my hand, like someone holding the lid of a pot that doesn't want to stay shut. When the subway stopped at my station, I got out with the step of someone who already knew she was going to sleep badly that night. I crossed 3 blocks to the studio. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs. I put the drenched canvases on the floor to dry as they could. I hung the coat on the hanger near the window. Before turning off the light, I reached into the pocket again. I took out the card. I looked, and I placed it inside the drawer of the paint workbench. Beneath a pile of dirty brushes I had no intention of cleaning anytime soon, like someone hiding something from herself. I turned off the light. Out there, somewhere in the city, a man with a small scar at the corner of his mouth was walking back to his car with a wet napkin still stuck to the lapel of his graphite gray jacket, and although I couldn't know it yet, and it would take a long time before I could know it, he was laughing alone inside the car, in a way he himself didn't remember having laughed in the last 10 years. Chapter 3. New Padlock. Old Mark Monday. Dawned with the smell of turpentine and reheated coffee. I had slept 3 hours on the low couch in the Greenpoint studio, still in my pantyhose and rumpled blouse, and woke up with a small certainty in my stomach. I was going to paint until my arm hurt, because it was the only thing no one had managed to take from me yet. The matte black card was still buried inside the drawer of dirty brushes, under a dry tube of ochre. I knew exactly where. The way you know where it hurts. I didn't take it out of there. I turned the radio up loud, opened the window to let in the cold air from the Newtown Creek Canal, and threw onto the canvas a red that was supposed to be rage and ended up looking like a dress. Around 2 in the afternoon, I caught the bus to the paint supplier in Williamsburg. I needed cadmium, raw sienna, titanium white, and 3 sable brushes. Absolute luxury. But the portrait of the couple I had delivered on Friday could cover it. The clerk was a thin guy with crooked glasses, the kind who always called me by my Italian last name, putting the accent on the wrong syllable. When I handed him my card, he frowned at the screen. Mrs. Marchetti, your account here was canceled last Friday. Canceled how? I asked. and heard my own voice climb half a tone. He turned the monitor. It was your fiancé. He called personally. Said it was to save money while you set up the house. I felt the blood rise to my neck. Caetano economizing on my paint was the same as a man cutting his own wife's vocal cords and calling it savings. But it's strange, the boy went on, adjusting his glasses, because someone paid off your open balance 2 hours later. In full. In cash. A man in a suit came in, left an envelope, didn't want a receipt, asked me to keep you supplied for the next 6 months, any order, and said he'd come close the account when you wanted to close it. I looked at him. A man in a suit. Italian, I think. He didn't say much. I held my face neutral. Inside, something stirred in a way I didn't know how to name. System bug, I thought, slowly and on purpose, like someone forcing the easy explanation in order to not look at the hard one. A client of mine must have paid by mistake. Some friendly credit card swapped at the register. The world is full of annoying coincidences. I left with the bag heavy with pigment, crossed the bridge on foot, and the whole way I repeated to myself that I didn't owe anyone anything. At home, I hid the tubes behind the easel before my mother could call, asking whether I had tried on the wedding dress yet. Caetano showed up on Wednesday morning without warning. I was in a dirty jumpsuit, hair pinned up with a pencil, in the middle of a private session with an elderly client who paid me with checks. I heard the key turn from the other side and froze. Then I remembered he had demanded a copy. Because it's reasonable, signorina. I'm your fiancé. The old lady raised her eyebrows. I smiled at her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a man to walk into my studio without knocking. Shall we continue tomorrow, Donna Cecilia? I asked. Lo, something has come up. She understood before I finished the sentence. Old women understand before. She picked up her purse and walked out without looking at Caetano, who stood in the center of the studio, hands in the pockets of his gray jacket, examining my canvases one by one, like someone inspecting damaged merchandise. You receive strange men here alone, he said, without looking at me. It wasn't a question. It was an 80-year-old lady. Today, he turned, finally. He had a dentist's smile. A married woman doesn't receive anyone in a closed room, Isolda. Learn that. He walked to the canvas of the previous morning's red, the one that had turned into a dress without my asking. He tilted his head. Ugly. It's unfinished. It's ugly. He shrugged. But it can stay. Hang it in the maid's kitchen at the new house. The maid will like that sort of thing. I felt the knot rise in my throat, and I had to swallow 3 times before speaking. You canceled my account at the supplier. I did. He came closer. I noticed for the first time that his shoes made noise with every step, even on old wood floors. It was unnecessary spending. A married woman doesn't buy paint with her own money, Isolda. That's the kind of thing a spoiled little girl playing painter does. He reached out and grabbed my arm just above the elbow. It wasn't a brutal grip. It was a measured grip, the kind that teaches, not the kind that hurts, and that's why it hurt more. I felt his fingers sink into the skin, with the calm of someone who had done it before in other women, and would do it again in a few more. Look at me, he said quietly. I looked. After Saturday, we're going to have a long conversation about what comes in and what goes out of here. Agreed? Agreed. He loosened his fingers one by one, like a man demonstrating control, and walked out. The door slammed. I stayed in the middle of the studio listening to the echo. I looked at my arm. The mark was already reddening in the exact shape of his 4 fingers. My stepmother called 10 minutes later to ask how the dress fitting had been. She insisted on calling as if nothing was cracked between us. I said it was beautiful, that the neckline was perfect, that she was going to cry when she saw me as a bride, because it was the kind of thing a woman like her needs to hear. When I hung up, I went to the drawer of dirty brushes, took out the matte black card, and stood turning it between my fingers for a stretch that was too long. The phone number had been written by hand, with a fountain pen, slightly slanted to the right. I had already memorized the digits without realizing it. I didn't call. I put it back, but this time not under the dry ochre, on top of everything, in the first layer of the drawer, like someone leaving a key near the door. Saturday came too quickly. A charity event in the ballroom of a hotel in Midtown, the kind with chandeliers the size of a small car. My parents and the Bramantes at the center table, gala obligatory, Caetano in a midnight blue tuxedo, me in a moss green dress with long sleeves, agreed between the two of us, because long sleeves hid what short sleeves gave away. I saw Federico Vallinari before I even walked into the ballroom. He was on the staircase, talking quietly with the mayor as if he were chatting with anyone. Graphite jacket, dark silk tie, hand in his pocket, the expression of a man who already knew how the night would end. He didn't look at me. I felt, from across the carpet, that he had sensed me come in. I exchanged plastic smiles for an hour. Caetano held my waist the whole time with the ownership of a man showing off a thoroughbred horse. When I needed to go to the restroom, it was almost a physical relief. When I came back through the hallway, I saw Federico leaning against a wall of ridiculous wallpaper, with a glass of whiskey in his left hand and his cell phone at his ear. He was speaking quietly, in Italian. I caught only a single loose word, "Papa," before he hung up and slid the phone into the inside pocket of his jacket. I almost bumped into him at the corner of the hallway leading to the women's restrooms. Federico stopped one step short of me, hands in his pockets. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me. "If you need it," he said quietly, without looking at me directly. "It's one phone call." And he kept walking. 6 words. He didn't touch me. He didn't slow his step. But I stood in the middle of the hallway with the absurd feeling that someone had opened a window in a room where the air had been running out. I went back to the ballroom, walking slowly. Caetano saw me arrive from across the space, because that's how a man like Caetano works. He always sees you arriving, and he crossed the 30 meters of carpet with the calm of a man who has already decided what he was going to do before the trip started. He smiled at a banker couple walking by. He smiled at the event photographer. He smiled at me. He fit his big hand into the back of my neck, under my pinned-up hair, like a man fondly adjusting a necklace. "Where were you?" he whispered in my ear, still smiling for the camera. "In the restroom." His fingers tightened just enough for me to feel each one of them separately on the skin. "Next time, you tell me." "I will." He loosened. He kissed my temple. The photo ran in the society pages the next day with the caption, "Couple announces official date." On the other side of the ballroom, leaning against a marble column with a glass in his hand, Federico was watching. Not at Caetano, not at me. He was watching Caetano's hand on my neck, with an expression so still it looked sculpted, the kind of stillness that warns, in silence, that something is about to break. His fingers around the glass went white by a millimeter. That was all. Caetano steered me by the elbow toward the center table. I didn't look back. In the car back to Manhattan, sitting between my father dozing and my mother talking about the altar decoration, I pulled the sleeve of the moss green dress up to my elbow and looked at my arm under the yellow light of the street lamps. The mark of Caetano's 4 fingers had turned into a greenish shadow with yellow edges. In 3 days it would be purple again, on top of the earlier one. I took the matte black card out of the small evening bag. I turned it between my fingers. The driver took the bridge, and the whole city hung from the right side of the window in tiny lights that looked like confetti from somebody else's wedding. I didn't tear it up. Chapter 4. The Clauses of Wednesday Night. 7 days until the wedding. I woke up Monday with the mark on my arm already yellowed, the one from the studio invasion, almost gone, and the most recent greenish shadow on the back of my neck, from the measured grip Caetano had left under my hair at last week's event. My head pounding from bad wine and the certainty that I needed to try once more. Not with Caetano, with my father. It was the last card I had before considering the other one. I walked across Manhattan in the cold morning. The trees in the park had already lost almost everything, and the wind drove the cold up under my sleeves. I arrived at my parents' house with my cheeks red and the speech memorized. Ottavio was in the library, in that cracked leather armchair where he had been learning to make himself small in recent years. I poured coffee for both of us without asking. I sat in front of him. "Dad." He raised his eyes. "I'm going to paint," I started, and held the tone firm. "Paint for real. Commission portraits, restoration, illustration, whatever turns up. 5 years. Every leftover cent goes straight to the account of the debt with Caetano. I make the spreadsheet. I show it to you month by month. I don't leave Brooklyn, but I don't marry him." He held the cup in both hands. I saw his fingers tremble. "Daughter, 5 years, Dad. I pay everything. I don't need a party. I don't need a husband. I don't need a new house. I need my brushes and my face far from his face." Ottavio closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet in a way that made me feel more pity than rage, and that irritated me with myself. "Caetano doesn't accept a swap, Isolde. Caetano accepts you. What kind of debt is worth a person's life? It's not a debt anymore." His voice came out small. "It hasn't been a debt for a long time. He wants you. He wants you." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the confirmation of something I had already sensed at the engagement dinner, in the squeeze under the table, in the forbidden short sleeve, in the new padlock promised for the studio. Caetano wasn't collecting a debt from my father. Caetano was collecting me, The debt was just the little notebook where he wrote my name. I stood up. He reached out a hand to me, without the courage to reach me. I shouldn't have opened my mouth that night years ago, he murmured, more to the cup than to me. I shouldn't have opened my mouth. What night, Dad? He looked at me up and down as if only now understanding that his daughter had grown up. Forget it, daughter. Forget it. I left the library without saying goodbye. In the hallway, I stopped in front of the portrait of my grandparents, the one my mother had insisted on keeping there even though the varnish had yellowed. I thought about my late mother. I thought about who had paid the hospital bill that had disappeared without explanation. I thought about the matte black card in the drawer of dirty brushes. Wednesday night, I walked through the revolving door of the restaurant where Federico Valignari ate dinner every Wednesday. I hadn't called. I had asked a society columnist for the address under the pretext of a made-up piece on Italian architecture. The maitre d' recognized me before I said my name. Miss Marchetti. I felt my stomach turn. They knew me. They knew my face. They knew my look. And neither of the two pretended to be surprised. Is he expecting me? I asked, just to hear it. He always is, signorina. I crossed the room behind the maitre d'. Tables with white tablecloths, low candles, couples in low voices, a pianist playing something in a minor key I couldn't identify. Federico was at a back table. His jacket hung over the back of the chair, his white sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading a document. He looked up when I arrived. He didn't move to greet me. He only raised an eyebrow in a way that said, "You took your time." I sat down without being invited. "Wine?" he asked, without letting go of the paper. "No." "Food?" "No." He folded the document slowly, slid it into the inside pocket of the jacket on the chair, and finally gave me his full attention. His eyes were the color of dark whiskey in candlelight. I had already noticed it at the cafe, that afternoon of rain, and had decided to forget it, and I was deciding to forget it again now. "I came to negotiate," I said. "I figured. Not your proposal. My clauses." He leaned back into the chair. He crossed his arms, slowly. The small scar at the corner of his mouth, on the right side, was more visible in candlelight than I remembered. "Speak." I had memorized the list on the subway. I had repeated it under my breath against the window fogged with steam. "Studio inviolable. You don't come in without being invited. No one in your family comes in without being invited. Not a capo, not a soldier, not your father." He gave a small nod. "Granted. No conjugal obligations of an intimate nature. Ever. Not on the first night, not on the last, not on any in between. If one day there's anything between us, it comes from me. Not negotiation, not duty." His jaw moved once. It was the only reaction. The candle on the table swayed. "Granted. The right to go to Florence once a year. Alone if I want. For as long as I want. You don't call me. You don't send anyone after me. You don't ask the name of the hotel. Granted. And I decide what I paint. You never commission a painting from me. You never say to a friend, 'She paints a portrait of you.' You never give a brush of mine as a gift to someone without asking me." He held the stem of the glass between two fingers. He turned it 1/2 centimeter. He looked at me like a man checking a sum and finding it adds up. "Granted, Signorina Marchetti." I was supposed to feel relief. I felt a tightening. "You're not going to argue any of them?" "No." "Why?" He smiled for the first time that night. It was a small smile, very small, the kind that if you weren't a meter away from his mouth you wouldn't see. "Because they were the clauses I would have written for you, if you had let me write them." I sat in silence. The pianist switched songs. I felt my heart beating in my temples and tried to convince it to slow down. "I have only one," he went on. He picked up the glass. He didn't drink. "If I ever break my word with you, Signorina, you can leave. I don't chase. You don't chase. I don't chase. Even being who you are. Especially being who I am." The candle swayed again. I looked at his hand on the table, wide, with a fine scar between thumb and index finger, and I realized I wanted to touch it, and I wasn't going to touch it, and that he was noticing the same thing, and pretending not to. His cell phone vibrated on the white tablecloth. He glanced quickly. His expression changed in 1/2 second, almost imperceptible, but I was already looking too much, and I caught it. "Family matter," he said, standing up. He took his jacket from the chair. "A child. You have nieces and nephews?" He hesitated 1/10 second. He fitted the jacket onto his shoulders without answering right away. "A niece," he said at last, in a neutral voice. "Signorina, I have to go. Good night." He left through the back door. I stayed at the table with 2 empty glasses and the difficult sensation of having stepped on something I didn't know was a trapdoor. I got up a few minutes later and walked out through the front. Different paths, different cities. Contract sealed. On the subway home, with the matte black card pinched between thumb and index finger in my pocket. I twirled the imaginary ring on my finger that he hadn't even put on yet, and tried not to think about that nameless niece. I thought about her anyway. Friday afternoon, Caetano picked me up at home to see the new house. I was already waiting. Brown wool dress, low-heeled shoes, pearl earrings, hair pinned up, practiced smile. The house was on a tree-lined street in Brooklyn Heights, the kind of street where the sound of the city arrived already filtered. 4 floors of brick, double-hung windows, black door with a bronze knocker. Caetano opened it with his key, let me go first, and closed the door behind us. I heard the lock turn twice. I didn't comment. He was expecting me to comment. The downstairs living room smelled of fresh varnish. The walls were white, with nothing hanging on them. He guided me by the hand down the hallway, his shoulder almost touching mine, the warmth of his jacket coming through the wool of my dress. "This is where I receive guests," he said, opening a door. "This is the large dining room. This is your morning room for coffee with the girlfriends." He smiled at me like a man giving a gift. "This is the pantry." We went up the stairs. On the first floor, he stopped in front of a closed door and opened it with a theatrical gesture. "And here," he said, "is your surprise." It was an empty room, white walls, tall window looking onto a little garden. No easel, no smell of paint, no brush. "Isn't it lovely?" he asked. "I still haven't decided if it will be a closet or a sewing room. What do you think, Signorina? And the studio?" He turned to me slowly. He put both hands on my shoulders, gently. He pressed his forehead against mine, in that hideous imitation of a man in love. "About the studio," he said, low, low. "We'll have a long talk after the I do. I've already bought a new padlock for the Greenpoint door, prettier than the old one. Dark brass. Caetano, painting is something that burns very quickly, Isolde." His voice was sweet. "I read about it. Acrylic canvas gives off a plastic smell. Oil gives off the smell of old grease. Watercolor is the only one that just turns to smoke. Did you know that?" I smiled. I felt the smile stretch my mouth as if my mouth weren't mine anymore. "I didn't know." "We'll learn together then." He kissed my forehead. "A married woman learns a lot of things. I can hardly wait." He laughed, a satisfied little laugh, and went down to pour me wine in the downstairs living room, leaving me alone in the empty white room for 2 minutes. I looked at the tall window. I calculated the height. I calculated the courtyard. I calculated nothing. I sat on the lip of the fake sill and breathed through my nose the way my mother taught me when I was a child and had nightmares. I went back smiling. I drank the wine. I praised the wallpaper. I asked about curtains. I left the new house with my lipstick intact and a firm hand on my fiancé's arm, like a bride. At home, alone in my old Manhattan bedroom, I locked the door with the key from the inside for the first time in 24 years. The wedding dress was hanging on a satin hanger in front of the wardrobe, wrapped in clear plastic, white as a hospital curtain. I sat on the bed in front of the dress. I looked. I looked for a long time. For the first time, I thought, not as a thought of panic, but as a practical thought, the same way I would think about buying brushes, that it was possible I might die inside that dress. Not necessarily on Saturday, but on some Saturday, in some month, in some little brick house, with a new padlock on the door. The idea didn't make me cry. It made me get up. I went to the dresser. I pulled from the drawers the small old cell phone I had kept from, back when I still gave painting lessons to children. I plugged it in at the low socket of the nightstand. I saved a single number from memory, the one that had been written by hand with a fountain pen, slightly slanted to the right. I took a roll of tape from the drawer. I cut 2 fingers' length of tape. I fastened the small cell phone under the lace garter I was going to wear on my right thigh, beneath the dress, on Saturday morning. I checked that it held. I stood up, walked around the room, did 3 laps, sat down, stood up again. It held. I took off the garter. I tucked it in with the underwear folded for the next day. I turned off the light. Before falling asleep, lying in the dark, I repeated under my breath, once, the sentence I had already written mentally. "If you still want me, come get me." I fell asleep with my hand on my chest, and when I woke up, it was the morning of my wedding day, Saturday. Chapter 5, Come Get Me. The morning light came through the stained glass windows of the Manhattan church, as if heaven itself had come to watch. I was standing in front of a gilt-framed mirror in the bridal suite, with the veil already pinned, the right shoe pinching my heel, and the concrete sensation that the dress had been sewn on the inside with barbed wire. Mira adjusted the lace on my shoulder for the 5th time, as if adjusting fabric could adjust fate. "If you run, I'll hold the bouquet," she said, in the tone of someone commenting on the weather. "And I'll make a scene, like movie-level scene. I kiss the groom's best man. I knock over the flower arrangement. Think of me as your personal smokescreen. Mira, I'm just saying, I have theoretical experience." I laughed in spite of myself, and the laugh hurt inside like a cracked rib. Every laugh in the last 6 weeks had that weight. It came out tearing something. My mother's jacket, which I had brought hidden inside the cover of the dress, was hanging on the back of the chair behind me. I looked at it more than I looked at the mirror. "Mira, stay close. I'm not leaving your side, not even if the cops show up." I tapped my right foot slowly to feel the small brass weight of the phone fastened under the lace garter against my thigh. The cold touch of metal against skin reminded me I still had a choice. I held on to that thought the way you hold a key inside a closed pocket. There was a knock at the door, 2 dry raps. I knew who it was before I saw. "May I?" Caetano Bramante asked, opening the door without waiting for an answer. Mira's shoulders automatically tightened, like a cat near a stove. Caetano was in a graphite tuxedo, pearl gray tie, a smile measured for the photographers. The textile businessman my father had picked to sell me to looked first at Mira, then at me, with a cordiality that weighed more than a threat. "May I have a moment with the bride?" he said, and it wasn't a question. Mira looked at me. I gave the smallest nod. She slipped out past the doorframe, throwing a, "I'll be right outside." That was a promise, not a goodbye. The door closed. The sound of the latch went into the back of my neck like a needle. Caetano crossed the room slowly, walked around my dress as one walks around a statue, and stopped behind me. I felt his breath before I heard his voice. Smell of mint and expensive whiskey masked by mouthwash. A smell I had learned to recognize in the dark over the past few weeks. "You look beautiful, Isolda," he said quietly. "You're going to be a magazine wife." I didn't answer. The muscles of my smile were already trained not to tremble. I looked at my own image in the mirror and forced myself to fix on my eyes, not his. He brought his mouth to my ear, slowly, almost tenderness. "After the I do," he began, and the voice was that of a man telling a sweet story to a child. "I'm going to take you straight to the new house, the one in Brooklyn Heights. You remember the white room?" "I remember." "Good," he smiled. "I saw it in the mirror. That same afternoon, the moving truck goes to the studio in Greenpoint. They're going to collect all the canvases. The one of the little girl's portrait, the gray one with the window, those 3 big ones you wanted to sell in Chelsea. All of them." My right hand went stiff around the bouquet. I forced my fingers not to go white. "They're going to the factory yard in Long Island City," he continued. "There's an old furnace there for fabric scrap. It works very well. I want to see the first canvas go in myself." "Caetano." "Shh." He pressed his index finger against my bare shoulder. "It's not the time for you to speak. I'm trying to be clear so there are no misunderstandings later." I swallowed dry, slowly, without showing. "The key to the Greenpoint apartment," he said. "That copy you still keep in the glove compartment of the mental taxi of a woman who thinks she has a way out. You hand it to me tonight. I already bought the new padlock. Dark brass. Very pretty. Goes with the old door." "It does go," I said with my mouth dry. "A married woman," he went on, in the same sweet voice, "doesn't receive a strange man in a closed room. She doesn't paint naked models. She doesn't travel alone. She doesn't go to a gallery without her husband. She doesn't tell her husband how she wants to spend her afternoon. A married woman learns. You're intelligent, Isolda. You'll learn quickly." He pressed his lips to my temple in a clean, photographic kiss. "I love you," he said, in a way that's hard to explain. His hand slid down to my wrist, squeezed lightly at the same spot as the engagement dinner, left the memory of the pressure there, and let go. 15 minutes, he said, looking at his watch. "Don't be late." He left the same way he came. The door closed again. The latch went in again. I breathed. A single time, deep, with my chin lifted so Mira wouldn't suspect anything when she came in. I lifted my skirt enough to feel the phone fastened to my thigh. The tape had survived a whole night of nightmares, and the makeup hour. "Mira," I called. "I need a minute to touch up my makeup. Alone. Please." She came in quickly, looked at me, read everything in a second. Mira's a restorer. She can see a crack in dry varnish from 3 meters. "Isolda, 1 minute. I'll be by the door. Stay." I locked the sacristy bathroom from the inside. The bolt was heavy, old, the kind that sings when you move it. I pressed my forehead against the cold mirror above the sink. I didn't cry. There was no time to cry. I lifted the skirt, I yanked the phone off the tape with a dry pull. The skin on my thigh went red. Good. Concrete pain. An anchor. I opened the screen. My fingers were trembling. I typed slowly, without autocorrect, because autocorrect would betray me. If you still want me, come get me. I looked at the sentence. 7 words. 7 chances to change my mind. I hit send. The screen went back to black. I held the device with both hands like someone holding a small bird, afraid to crush it and afraid to let it go. The answer came in 40 seconds. I do. 20 minutes. That was it. No period. No name. I sat on the toilet lid with the dress all spread out around me, pressed the back of my neck against the cold tile, and counted. I didn't get to 20 minutes. I got to 19. Then I heard it. It wasn't a shot. It wasn't a scream. It was silence. A different silence. The kind that happens when 100 people stop breathing at the same time in a closed space. The church organ stopped in the middle of a note. Shoes striking marble, dry. A side door opening, then another. My father's voice, far away. Wait. Listen a moment. Cut off by nothing. Only by more silence. There was a knock on the sacristy bathroom door. 2 firm raps. Not 3. Not 1. Isolda. I recognized the voice in the first syllable. Calm. Low. Without urgency. The voice of a man who had walked, not run. I looked in the mirror above the sink. Mascara smudged in 2 trails down my face. Bitten lipstick. Crooked veil. Good. I look like a bride who finally woke up. I stood up. My legs worked. I reached out my hand to the bolt and pulled. The bolt sang. Federico Valinari was on the other side, in a navy suit, graphite tie, hands calm at his sides. Tiziano 1 step behind, on the threshold of the sacristy, blocking the door with his shoulder as if he were a wall. Through the gap of Tiziano, I saw a piece of the church's nave, people standing, frozen, holding flowers, fans, cell phones in the middle of the gesture of filming. Federico looked at me. He lingered on my eyes first, then on the crooked veil, then on the bouquet crushed in my left hand. He didn't touch me yet. Do you want to go? He asked. I do. Through the front door or the side one? The question anchored me. It wasn't a soap opera rescue. It was logistics. I breathed. Front. He gave a single nod. He held out his right hand. I looked at his open palm a second longer than I needed to. I placed mine on top. His fingers closed slowly, without squeezing. Tiziano. I'll go ahead, said Tiziano, turning. We left the bathroom. We crossed the sacristy. We went through the side door and emerged into the nave, at the point where the red carpet begins to rise toward the altar. The whole church saw us at the same time. I saw the eyes before the mouths, 100 pairs of eyes opening 2 millimeters wider, guests in stone silence, my father's aunts with their fans lowered, the Chelsea gallerist, sitting in the 5th pew on the right side, looking at me as if she were appraising a genuine work. I walked, in veil, in dress, hand in hand with the wrong man at the right ceremony. Federico walked at my rhythm, not his. I could feel his ring on his right ring finger brushing my fingers with every step. A signet ring, dark, with an olive branch over an anchor. Caetano was standing next to the altar, beside the priest who had been left with his hand suspended in the air. He took 2 steps forward. The graphite tuxedo rippled. You're not going. Tiziano placed himself between Caetano and us with the calm of a man adjusting a watch. He didn't draw anything. He didn't have to. The 2 men with him positioned themselves diagonally in the side aisles without anyone having seen them come in. It's going to rain, signore, Tiziano said, slowly, looking up at the ceiling of the church. Inside, too. Caetano locked up. He sought my eyes over Tiziano's shoulder. I held Federico's hand a little tighter, and I looked at Caetano, and I didn't lower my chin. My father appeared from the left side, from behind a column, and tried to intercept. Ottavio Marchetti, coward with a mustache, grabbed the sleeve of my dress. I didn't stop walking. The sleeve tore a bit at the shoulder. It was the cleanest sound I have ever heard in my life. Isolda, listen. No, I said, without turning. We crossed the main gate of the church. The light from the street hit my eyes all at once. 2 black cars were pulled up against the curb with drivers standing outside, jackets buttoned, hands crossed. Mira came out of the crowd behind me holding my purse and my mother's jacket bundled in her arm. She had had time to grab everything. That's how Mira is. Go, she said, throwing the jacket onto my lap in the back seat. Go, go, go. I'll handle the ants. The car door closed. Tiziano sat up front. Federico got in the other side, next to me. He didn't touch me. He only asked, low, looking ahead, to the chapel or to your place? I looked out the window. The gate of the church was already behind us. Caetano was still on the steps, paralyzed, with white fists. The chapel. Federico gave a nod to the driver. The car pulled away slowly, not in any hurry to flee. It was important to him, I realized in that moment, to leave without rushing. A dawn doesn't run. A dawn takes. "Are you all right?" he asked, after 3 blocks. "No." "Okay. Me neither." I turned my face toward him. It was the first time he had admitted anything out loud. He kept looking ahead. The line of his jaw had a small tension I had never seen, a muscle working under freshly shaved skin. "Federico." Thank you." He closed his eyes for half a second, opened them. "You don't thank me every minute. Deal?" "Deal." It was the only exchange until Mulberry Street. The chapel in Little Italy sat between a bakery and a shop of St. Cards. Low window, dark wood door, a small iron cross. The car stopped in front of it. Tiziano got out first, opened the door for me. I got out holding my skirt so I wouldn't trip on the curb. Federico steadied my elbow with a short, sufficient gesture. Inside, the priest was waiting for us, a man of about 60, with the stole already around his neck, and no question on his face. He greeted Federico with a nod and looked at me with the gentleness of men who have learned to look at people in mourning. "Daughter," said the priest, "would you like a moment?" "No, father. You can begin." He began. In Latin first, then in Italian, then in broken English. For me, it was short. Tiziano standing beside me, an improvised best man, hands crossed in front of his body like a soldier at ease. Federico to my right. When we got to the rings, Federico took from the inside pocket of his jacket a small box of worn velvet. He opened it, 2 simple bands of plain gold, with no inscription. "Where did you get those?" I whispered. "I've had them a month. I bought them the day after the cafe." I swallowed dry. I didn't comment then. He held my left hand. His skin was warm. The ring slid onto my finger as if it had been sized on a day I wasn't paying attention. I picked up his, lifted his hand. The family signet ring was on his right ring finger. The left was free. I slid the ring on. His fingers trembled by a millimeter. I think only I saw it. "You may kiss the bride," said the priest. Federico looked at me. I looked back. He pressed his forehead to mine for a long second, with no kiss on the mouth. It was better than a kiss. The priest didn't comment. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't owe me anything," he answered. We walked out of the chapel with twilight falling over Mulberry Street, slowly, staining the facades the color of brick. The driver opened the car door. Tiziano held my veil so I could sit without crushing it again. I looked at my left hand. The ring shone under the low light. I was really married. Chapter 6. The morning after the storm. The Tribeca penthouse was all polished concrete, exposed brick, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Federico opened the steel door with a magnetic key, held it for me to go in first, and closed it behind us with a low click. The high ceiling swallowed the sound of my shoe on the floor. Kitchen on the right, living room on the left, bedrooms hallway in the back. "Your luggage comes tomorrow." Mira arranged it with Tiziano. T-shirt of mine on top of the bed in the guest room. "Bathroom has everything. You choose the pace of everything." He said the whole paragraph like a man handing over the keys to a rental car. Calm, functional, without intrusion. "Okay," I answered. I stood in the middle of the hall with the crumpled dress, the veil hanging from a single hairpin, my mother's jacket bundled in both arms like a child. Federico took off his jacket slowly, tossed it on the back of a chair, undid the first button of his shirt. He didn't take off the new ring. Neither did I. "I'm going to take a shower," I said. "Go." I crossed the hallway. The guest room was simple, wide bed, low lamp, and a gray t-shirt folded on the bedspread. I got out of the dress after a long fight with the buttons on the back. Mira always did that work. Left the thing standing like a deflating ghost in the corner, and got into the shower with the water way too hot. I came out 15 minutes later with his t-shirt going down to mid-thigh. It smelled of soap that wasn't mine, and of cedar. I avoided the mirror. The phone vibrated on the bed. Voice message from Mira. 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Isolda. I'm not even going to ask if you're okay, because I know you are, and if you aren't, I'll catch the first Uber. I just need 5 seconds to process the following. You are a mob guy's wife now. Like, literally. I went to get my purse at a church and I heard one of your aunts say the word Valinari 3 times in a row and cross herself with the other hand. The Chelsea gallerist, that bitch of a gallerist, stopped me on the steps to ask if you still had the big canvases. I told her you had tripled the price. You're welcome. Caetano left through the side door looking like he was about to throw up a tuxedo. Your dad looked at me 3 times like I was the devil in a short glove. I smiled. Isolde, I'm having dinner with Beatrice tonight. She's hysterical, but it's good hysteria. Send a photo of his t-shirt. I know there's a t-shirt of his. There's always a t-shirt of his. I laughed. For the first time that day, the laugh came out whole, without hurting. I walked back barefoot down the hallway. Federico was in the kitchen, without his jacket, without his tie, his white shirt with the cuffs folded up his forearms. There was a pot on low heat and 2 empty glasses on the marble counter, an open bottle of wine breathing beside them. Cold pasta with tomato, he said, without turning. It's not a wedding without eating something. Federico. Yes, let's eat on the floor. He turned. He had a small smile on his mouth, the kind that doesn't fully reach the eyes, but reaches them anyway. On the floor. We served the plates. We sat on the polished concrete floor of the kitchen, backs against the low cabinets, legs stretched out in front of us. Him to my right. The glasses between us. The hot pot forgotten on top of the turned-off stove. His gray t-shirt covered enough. Even so, I kept my mother's jacket over my shoulder, like a shawl. You bought the rings a month ago. I did. Why? He turned the glass between his fingers, slow. I'm a man who prepares. You showed up at my restaurant on a Wednesday without being invited, negotiated written clauses, and left without letting me pay for dinner. I went home and bought 2 rings the next day. It didn't mean certainty. It meant respect. You don't know me, I said quietly. He looked at me. He took his time. I know. We drank wine in silence. It wasn't soap opera silence. It was tired people silence. I rested my head against the low cabinet and closed my eyes for a moment. What do you want to paint first? He asked. I thought. I took my time. I found the answer before I knew I had found it. The silence after a storm. He didn't answer. When I opened my eyes, he was looking at me as one looks at a painting from 3 meters away, without hurry, without hunger, without anything that asks, just attention. Do you sleep with the light on? He asked. Since my mother. How long? 2 years. How old was she? 52. Cancer. It was quick for her, slow for me. He listened to the whole thing, with no on-duty face of sympathy. He just listened. My father, he said afterward, has been dying for 10 years. He smells of olive trees and antibiotics. I grew up in an olive yard in Sicily when I was a child, and I loved the smell. Today I can't stand it. It turns into a headache in seconds. Does his house smell of olive? His house smells of what he wants it to smell of. To me, today, it's debt. I looked at his profile from the side. It was the first personal sentence he had given me without being asked. Federico. Why that cafe? In the rain. That day. He turned the glass one more time. He didn't answer right away. I saw his Adam's apple go down slowly. I was waiting for a contact from the port. But the port is nearby. It's always nearby. There were many cafes. That one was yours. You knew it was mine? He looked at me. I held the look. I knew it was a cafe near your studio, he said. I didn't know you'd be there crying. That was my luck. I swallowed. The answer didn't close every door, but it opened one. And at that moment it was enough. I threw the napkin in your face. You did. You laughed. I did. For how long? He turned his face toward me. For the first time that night, he smiled all the way. Longer than I should have. I smiled too. The glass was in my right hand. His fingers were on the left side of the same glass, without my noticing when he had touched it. The first knuckle of my thumb was touching his. Neither of us pulled back. I looked at the hand. He looked at my mouth. I tilted slowly. He pressed his forehead to mine. The gray t-shirt now had his smell mixed with soap. I could feel his breath millimeters away, without urgency, waiting for me to decide. I decided. The kiss was just one. Slow. Without hunger. Without rush. Without promise. With a little wine on his mouth. With his ring touching my cheek when he held my face. My mother's jacket slipped from my shoulder and fell to the floor, and I didn't pick it up. When the kiss ended, he pressed his forehead against mine again, and stayed there a second longer. Then he stood up. He held out his hand. I took it. He turned off the kitchen light without turning his head. The hallway was dark. The first thing I saw the next morning was the ring on my finger, resting on the white sheet, with the sun coming down on top of it as if it were looking for exactly that gold. The gray t-shirt had slipped off one shoulder. The cedar smell was still on the pillowcase. I lay there with my eyes open for a whole minute, before even moving, listening to the muffled traffic of Tribeca 7 floors below. Federico wasn't in the bed. I found him in the kitchen, barefoot, jeans, gray shirt, the Italian coffee pot rising on the low heat, 2 small cups on top of the marble. My mother's jacket was folded carefully over a chair. Someone had picked it up from the floor and folded it. I looked at the fold. It was right. He saw me leaning in the doorway. "Coffee," he said. "Coffee." He poured 2 small cups. He passed me mine without asking about sugar. I don't take sugar. I don't know how he knew. I sat on the high counter. He stood on the other side. The marble counter between us. Cold. I crossed my legs, the gray t-shirt sliding down as much as it would. He didn't look at the legs. He looked at my face. The living room TV was on mute. I turned my neck and saw Caetano Bramante, a remade graphite suit on the steps of a building in Midtown. Microphones around him. Mouth moving fast. Finger pointing at someone off frame. No sound. Federico picked up the remote, read the automatic captions for 2 seconds. "He's swearing revenge in 3 different kinds of press," Federico said. "It'll be in rotation for 3 weeks. Then he tires." "And my father?" He turned his phone to me. 7 missed calls from Ottavio. 3 voice messages. 2 long text messages in all caps. "I didn't listen," he said. "I'm not going to listen before you do." I picked up the phone. I looked at the screen. I deleted everything without listening to anything. I gave it back. "Later," I said. "Not today. Later." His phone rang. A number from Sicily. He answered, turned 3 steps into the living room, leaned against the window glass. He spoke Italian too low for me to follow word by word. I caught a few. My mother used to listen to opera. "Sì, più tardi. Capisco. Lei sta bene." "Sì, papa." He had his back to me. The line of his shoulders had that same small tension I had seen in the car. I set down the cup, leaned in the kitchen doorway, crossed my ankles. For half a second, less than a sip, a loose thought crossed my mind. How was it that he had shown up at exactly that cafe, on that day, at that table? The smell of fresh coffee rose through the kitchen. The ring was on my finger. My mother's jacket was folded right on the chair. Mira had sent another voice message asking for a photo of the t-shirt. Federico was laughing quietly at something his father had said. I smiled, and I let it go. He hung up. He came to the counter. He set the phone down on the stone. He propped both hands on the marble with his fingers open. "Tiziano is going to send people to get your things in Greenpoint today," he said. "You say what comes and what stays. Nothing disappears without your decision. The studio stays. It stays. And the canvases? Back to Greenpoint. The ones with Bramante will recover this week. No alarm. Okay." He looked at me. "Do you want to stay here today? Or would you rather go to the studio? Here. Okay." I stretched my hand across the marble. I rested it on top of his. His fingers were open. He laced mine into them without looking, slowly, as if the gesture were an old one. His signet ring touched my new ring. The gold sat against the olive branch over the anchor. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 2 years, the air came in whole. The Italian coffee pot made one last low click on the stove. Tiziano knocked at the door. 3 firm raps. Federico didn't let go of my hand. He only turned his face toward the door and said, without hurry, "Avanti." Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought I had finally been chosen. 3 months sleeping in Federico's bed, wearing his shirt in the morning, feeling the coffee fill the kitchen while he touched me as if I were the only woman who fit in that dark world. I was naive enough to call that home. Until the late night when I heard my name in the middle of a truth he never had the courage to tell me. I wasn't fate. I was a bet. The cafe, the encounter, the marriage. It had all been set up before I even understood I was falling. And the worst wasn't finding out he had lied. It was finding out he had a daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't wake the man sleeping beside me as if he hadn't broken me in silence. I only looked at him one last time and thought, where was the mother of that child? Who had she been to Federico? And how did he have the courage to give me his bed, his house, and his last name? If maybe his heart already belonged to a family before me, why was this bet so important? There was something I still didn't know. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.